Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex. Lord, a sad day, a sad week of football for Georgia and Falcons fans. Pretty much it's a sign that the season has come to an end.
And the Braves are just not
there
is not much happiness in this state.
Yeah, I mean the Hawks are playing a little bit better.
Okay.
I mean, it's something to look forward to. I guess they'll at least carry us. They'll bridge the gap between the Braves and then NFL free agency. Hopefully they can keep playing well. But last night, Georgia, we talked about Georgia suffocating Notre Dame. It happened in reverse. And it happened in all three phases. What was your biggest takeaway from this huge win for a Notre Dame program that never seemed to get over the top and finally seems like they may have?
I don't think that people are blowing this game way out of proportion. A lot of box score watching, a lot of people who want to see the SEC fall, and they did. I think you would be completely wrong to say this wasn't an overrated SEC field. But also, I think let's give some context. First of all, only a moron would compare that Indiana loss to this Georgia loss. Georgia outgained them. Georgia did better on third downs. And I don't want to say the only reason Notre Dame won, but the only reason people are talking about this is because of two plays, and they happened back to back. It was the end of the half, fumble, touchdown, and then to begin the second half, the touchdown off the kickoff. For the most part, and I know this is probably going to ruffle some feathers, Georgia won the trenches. I do believe, at least defensively, they won the trenches defensively. Now, offensively, Georgia's offensive line, I think, really embarrassed themselves. They should have manhandled that Notre Dame, undersized Notre Dame defense. Credit to the Notre Dame defense. They came to play. But obviously the fumble, the Trevor Etienne fumble in the red zone, the Gunnar Stockton fumble inside their own 10, and then the Notre Dame kickoff return. Like, that kind of stuff doesn't really happen and teams win. Like, there was really no way for Georgia to win that game with all the self-inflicted wounds and mistakes that they were doing. Credit to Notre Dame. I completely overestimated Notre Dame's, I guess, maybe their ferocity. I mean, they came out to play. They were flying around the ball defensively. I still think that game was much closer than people are going to give it credit for. One thing I will say that I think cannot be argued, and this is against Marcus Freeman, hat tips. I mean, that guy outcoached the best coach in college football for 60 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. I think the two takeaways that I think you have to give Notre Dame's defensive line a ton of credit because You're right. They were without their best defensive lineman, their biggest defensive lineman, and even Howard Cross went out there and got injured later in that game. I mean, it didn't matter who played. They dominated Georgia's offensive line. Now, Georgia's defense did everything that you would expect.
Everything
they held them to 9 points for all intents and purposes, outside of the one touchdown that they got at the end of the half that, was a 10-yard touchdown on a one-play drive. They held them to 9 points. They held them to like 215 yards. About the only thing Notre Dame could do at all was Riley Leonard, having a couple of scrambles, which Riley Leonard,
clutch moments.
Yeah. I mean, he played a great game in that type of game. Like, you're going to look at the box score and be like, oh, Riley Leonard didn't really do anything. Well, Riley Leonard won them the game because he was basically their entire offense against a defense that they really had no answers to, which is what I expected. What I didn't expect, though, is Georgia's offensive line to be that bad. Now, Georgia's offensive line was a struggle that we talked to point throughout this season. But I think where we underestimated is just how good that Notre Dame defensive line is, because despite Georgia's offensive line struggling at times, they'd never been dominated quite like they were against Notre Dame outside of maybe that Ole Miss game. But Ole Miss, we give a lot of credit. We say that that might be the best offensive line. I think it's time you got to say something similar when you're looking at the best defensive lines in college football. You go to Ohio State, you go to Notre Dame, you go to Ole Miss, maybe South Carolina sprinkles in there. But you got to give that group. I think if there was one place that I underestimate him, it's there. You're right on Marcus Freeman. I think he's really elevated this program. He's instilled a sense of belief. And what you heard in the way he speaks and the way he approaches it, talking about it at halftime, hey, we know it's going to be a 60. That team was flying around the ball for 60 minutes, quite literally 60 minutes. The game's 23-10. Gunnar Stockton gets the ball with 2 minutes to go, no timeouts. They have no chance of winning. It didn't matter. They played until the final absolute whistle. That was the most impressive aspect of it to me. And I think a big part is that Marcus Freeman. You can talk about the punt that they did and a few of the other things where obviously, they were, had a great game plan. And they were ready for a heavyweight fight. And I think when you talk about where this game was lost, it was lost at the end of the second half. The special team touchdown was huge, but at the end of the day, those two things combined, you can live with one of those.
Yes,
but one of them was purely your fault. And there was no reason why Gunnar Stockton was going out there and throwing with 38 seconds left when your defense is doing what they're doing to Notre Dame.
I think both of those are prevent. Special teams touchdowns, obviously game change. That, in my opinion, and I don't want to sound like a dunce, but they're preventable. Like, let's just stay in our lanes. This is discipline stuff. Like, I don't know how you lose the game on plays that, we're not going to see for the rest of the playoff. Like, two plays in which, are very, very rare. And we probably won't see either of them separately in a playoff again. Well, I guess Oregon or Ohio State, I think one of them returned a kickoff. It doesn't matter. The point is one of those things happening. I agree. You can absolutely overcome. And while I didn't hate Georgia trying to be aggressive, showing Gunnar that they believed in him. Kirby, have some, you as a coach have never been this ultra aggressive Lane Kiffin-esque kind of a guy. You've been a defensive run the football. And on top of that, you got a guy making his first ever start. You got an offensive line that's already pretty bad. And you've seen through almost two full quarters that the offensive line had its hands full and all aspects. So while I do agree, also I want to say Gunnar Stockton was not the reason the Georgia Bulldogs lost that football game. I think it's going to be ironic when I see some Georgia fans already blaming the injuries when they laugh at Bama fans and Ohio State fans. Listen, Carson Beck's in there. You still don't win that football game.
No, I think the biggest reason I hated it was not because of Gunnar Stockton and their faith in them. Because listen, if they were able to protect, if Georgia was able to protect, and I've said this about Notre Dame, and we're going to see this later in the playoff, maybe not by Penn State, who doesn't have this high-flying passing attack, but if they play Ohio State or if they play Texas and they can protect the quarterback, they're going to have huge problems in their secondary. This is a receiving core that is not good on Georgia, and they were running wide. They were running wide open most of the game. The biggest issue was the fact that they couldn't protect them. So Notre Dame has issues in their secondary. They've had issues in their secondary. You saw it against USC. You saw it several times throughout the course of the season, whether it was Louisville. You saw it again against Georgia. They couldn't protect Gunnar Stockton. So I didn't mind it from a Gunnar Stockton and these receivers being able to make plays perspective. I mind it because you couldn't protect them and you're opening yourself up. And for a team like Georgia, it going into the half,
you didn't need to be aggressive.
I understand going into the half 6-3 when it felt like he completely dominated the first half. Kind of a pill you don't want to swallow, but it's a pill in that situation you needed to swallow. Come out, realize it's a 60-minute game, which Marcus Freeman did and Kirby Smart clearly didn't, and go out and win the second half, which I believe they would have done. Even with the special teams touchdown, I think they would have been able to do it. But you let it get out of hand there because of that, and then the momentum continues on the very next play of the first half, and all of a sudden you're in a hole that's just too big to dig out of when you can't protect the quarterback and you have a first-year guy making his starts and you don't really have the receivers.
That's why I think the whole, Notre Dame dominated Georgia is completely overblown. Like Georgia, for all intents and purposes, won that first half. I know on the scoreboard they didn't, and I'm playing the, defense game. Guys, I'm not a UGA fan, LSU fan. I hate Notre Dame, but like Georgia dominated that first half. And then those two plays, at the end of the first half and the beginning of the second half, completely changed the tides. And then obviously Notre Dame inflicted their will. But I refuse to listen to anybody who believes that Georgia was just outclassed 100% of the way. Now, in some facets, absolutely. Special teams, absolutely horrific job. That's an inexcusable moment. But like I said, Georgia's defense you just watch that first half and maybe the second half with Georgia's defense, you believe that Georgia wins that game. easily, in my opinion.
I think Georgia lost in all three phases by a team that was better coached, better well prepared for the type of game that it was going to be. And I think that's the most shocking part when you're talking about this game the night after it, because Kirby Smart, it wasn't just the fake punt. It was the fact that they dominated on special teams, which is something they've done all year. They have that Notre Dame has been maybe the best team on special teams all season. They blocked a lot of punts. They've returned kicks. They're a great special team. And these are all signs of just being very well coached. And it's why if there's one takeaway, I'll give the defensive line of Notre Dame a ton of credit because they were outstanding. It definitely a group that needs to be talked about a ton going into these Final Four matchups when you're talking about Penn State and potentially Ohio State after that. But the biggest thing to me is Marcus Freeman earning his stripes because he went out there and, like you said, outclassed Kirby Smart
with Brian Kelly's team.
Yeah, and it's not the first time. It's not the first time that Kirby Smart's been out coached. Like, don't get me wrong, he's the best in the business at the entire role, but it's not the first time on game day that he's been out coached. And Marcus Freeman went out there for 60 minutes with a better plan, and in all three phases, Notre Dame was better than Georgia. And I think they deserve the credit that they're going to get. This was definitely a weaker Georgia team, a weaker SEC team. And we'll talk about, I think that's a good thing that we can talk about after the break, this SEC dominance, the downfall of the SEC. Everyone is partying on the SEC's grave this morning after what's happened over the last week. But is it something they're going to be laughing about in the future? We'll talk about it after the break.